Hey there, everybody. It's Jenny Clark with Solvability, and today's session about GovCon Summit is so important to me because we've gone through such a challenging year this past year. And what I wanted to do is let you listen to some people that I consider to be thought leaders in topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. People that are making statements about how you operate in this world, how to be more attentive about our language and how we reach out to other people. I feel like there's so many people that want to say something but are afraid to say something about all the civil disturbance we've gone through over the last several months, and it seems like it's not really getting better. It's just people are more aware, and that's really not enough. Well, the reason I brought these three people together is because Nick Wakeman, I've been following for a long time with Washington Technology, and he had some fascinating articles and podcasts that he put out about what is the role of federal contractors in leading the corporate community in this area. I also brought on Terry Spain, who has written several books about it. Was a guest on one of my Freedom Friday sessions talking about unconscious bias. And he gave me some different ways to think about all of these topics and how to communicate it to other people as well. So that's why I wanted him to be a part of this conversation. And last, we've got Karen Gregory, who I've known for quite a while as an Air Force veteran, is always very clear about people's responsibility from a leadership role. We're all looking for other people to help us move forward, encourage us to speak out, whatever we need to be doing. But what I'd encourage people to do is continue the conversation, move it forward where you can. Personally, what I found is I do post a lot of things on LinkedIn, and when it gets political or negative, I just back off and say, I'm going to go talk to somebody else where I can make a difference, where I can have some statements that matter. So I'm going to introduce first Nick Wakeman and let him talk a little bit about Washington Technology, his role as a leader in this federal community. So Nick, I think that you do Fast 50, Washington Technology Fast 50. And when I was organizing this event, I was looking for who are the leaders in the federal contracting community of small business. My main focus is with federal businesses that are veteran entrepreneurs. And I tend to work with the smaller ones, the 10 to 50, because when I see them succeed, they overnight or over a very short period of time can make a big impact. And the Washington Technology Fast 50, those are the movers, right?
Yeah, that's a really great list that we do because it is a great way for us to identify sort of these up and coming companies and who's, often, with these niche capabilities and niche technologies that they're finding a lot of success. And it is remarkable to see them over a 4 or 5 year period go from, some of them less than $1 million to being, 15, $20 million in 5 years. It's really, really pretty extraordinary. And then talking to the executives, which is one of the things I enjoy the most, and just hearing their, the passion for what they do, the passion for the market, that's a really fun thing for me personally to write about.
Okay. And so one of the things that you wrote and did a podcast about was asking some of the federal contractors to take more responsibility, be part of the voice about what do we need to be doing as a community. Do you mind sharing some information about that?
Yeah, I did a little bit of that before, the murder of George Floyd, but that was such just a watershed event. I mean, I think it, while unfortunately it wasn't the first incident like that, it was really one that just sort of, energized people, and we had to do something. And so when looking at that as a journalist, I had to start to kind of, started noticing a few companies making statements. And so I started reaching out to more and more, just trying to find, okay, so what are you doing? What are you doing? And in the beginning, people were very reluctant to talk about it. I think they were, government contractors are generally conservative, and I don't necessarily mean politically, like right or left, but they don't like to call on attention to themselves outside of sort of their areas of expertise. They want to serve their customer. That's what they want to talk about. But this was such a bigger issue, and it was impacting so many of their employees and I felt too that it's a huge industry that they should take responsibility. they should address these issues because it impacts their employees and definitely impacts their, uh, um, their customer, because it's a diverse customer set. I mean, and so what we found as we started covering it, it probably took a couple months, and then we started seeing people being more, you know, more willing to talk about it as far as like what they were doing and what how they were handling. I think maybe it just took people a little while to to figure that out. I mean, I had some very interesting conversations. I talked with this one company, a mid-sized company, and they said they had always looked sort of at their diversity of their workforce, and they thought they were doing pretty good because they were just sort of looking at the mix and things like that. But then the other part of diversity is inclusion. And so then they started realizing, well, wait a minute, our management team of, I think, 8 or 10 were all, white people except for one person. And they started realizing, well, that's not, we should be better than that. But they actually, they were very frank with me. They weren't sure what to do or how to address it. I mean, this is, I should go back to them and see what they're doing now. But they did talk about, setting up programs to make sure that in that pipeline that they're getting more, more diversity in there, and that even if you're not a manager, to make sure that your voice can be heard at the company. Sort of that's another big part of what they were trying to get at. But I also had to look at myself too. I mean, I remember, Washington Technology started off as a print publication. And I remember we kind of came out every 2 weeks, and we had this joke in the office. We'd be flipping, proofing pages, and you're going through, and it's like, we had this expression, oh, this is another MOG issue, because all the photos were full of middle-aged white guys. So that, we called them, MOGs. And so, and we would try, but I have to admit, we weren't very intentional and with it, and as we should be, and which we're trying to do now, as far as finding more diverse sources and, um, trying to, we do events and trying to get, a broader base of speakers at our events and that kind of thing. So, kind of lost my track there, I guess. So with the coverage, you start talking to companies. We did a couple podcasts. And one thing I've also learned is, because now we're just about a year out from George Floyd, is not to forget to ask certain questions. I was interviewing an executive not too long ago, and I asked her, I said, so, she had been running, I guess she took her position before George Floyd, but, she hadn't been doing it maybe a year. So I was asking her, okay, you came in managing the workforce. How did that event change how you manage or what you do? And she told me afterwards, because, I'm so glad you asked me that question, because, I've been doing, and she's with a very large company. I mean, a Fortune 500 size, and she's running their government group. She says, you're only the second person in a year that's asked me that question, which really kind of surprised me, because to me, it was such a watershed event. You have to ask that question. So, I don't know, does that answer? I can just ramble on and on. I don't want to.
No, I think that that's exactly what we're talking about. It's so easy for me not to ask the question.
Yeah.
It's so easy for me just to say, well, I don't have to say anything. Why should I put myself out there?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's not the place that I want to be anymore. But I've also noticed in talking to people over this last 12 months that some people would have a conversation with me. Other people said, well, I'm not going to talk about that. That might impact my business negatively.
Right.
Meanwhile, what's happening is we're missing out on talents. We are not offering opportunities to people that could actually help us have more impact in our company. And we're kind of ignoring the voices of people that really want to have a bigger contribution and a bigger role. And what I kept hearing is, I want to see a role model that looks like me.
Yeah.
And whether it's men and women or it's a racial identity, it's all part of the same thing. It's like, I never want to be the best woman. I want to be the best leader.
Right.
And I want to create opportunities where possible to make that possible for everybody. But at the same time, it's so much easier for me to say, I'm just not going to do anything about that.
Yeah.
And that's why we're really asking people to step forward and see what they need to do. But missing out on talent is a big part of it. Also, missing out on awareness that somebody would be able to bring up. But if you're always the minority voice, after a while, you just say, well, I'm not bothering with this anymore. All I do is get looked at like it's something crazy. And so we begin to think that our ideas are they really out of norm? And so it's a lot easier just to not say anything. One of the books that I read during this period of time was Malcolm Gladwell, who's the author of Blink and Tipping Point, wrote Talking to Strangers. And I really encourage people to read that book because it really made people question their assumptions about where everything is. And talk about questioning our assumptions. Terry Spain, you were in the Navy, Navy chief. You retired out of Jacksonville. I first met you on LinkedIn through another group, and I wanted to say I want to listen more and learn from other people about their experience, because I shouldn't be assuming that I'm doing the right thing or that I'm doing enough. And I'm really just challenging people to say, what action could I take in addition? But you said you had a great story to tell me. To give an example of this has something to do with cell phones. Do you mind sharing? And also go ahead and tell people a little bit about yourself, Terry.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity, first and foremost, Jenny, and to the other panel members. Congratulations on being selected. And one small correction, I actually retired from out of Patrick Air Force Base. It was a joint command there, even though I'm Navy, it's an Air Force base there. I'm quite sure Karen's pretty familiar with that base there. So my name is Terry Spain. I retired from the Navy, as you mentioned before, as a Chief Petty Officer. One of my main jobs there, I came in the Navy and I was a mass communication specialist, pretty much public affairs. But for the last 6 years of my naval career, I took on the road as initially it was an equal opportunity advisor, but then it later was converted over to a command climate specialist. And this is where I had an opportunity to do a lot of things as it relates to diversity and inclusion and getting an insight on senior leadership. And that's working with the White House, Camp David, the Naval Academy, and other locations, which actually kind of honed and helped my skills a lot working in the Washington, D.C. area before coming to Patrick Air Force Base. But I do want to share a quick story. I kind of told Jenny what it was, but it was, and this is just an analogy that I normally use for folks, just to get them to thinking, not only about diversity and inclusion, but just by being a great leader and knowing your people. So normally what I would do, I would have a picture when I'm doing a lot of these speaking engagements, I would have a picture of a cell phone. And I would ask everyone to raise their hand if they have apps on their cell phone. So of course, everyone will raise their hand. And then I will also ask them, how many apps do you have on your cell phone? And normally a lot of folks don't know how many apps, because you get apps all the time, you download them, they pop up for no particular reason or what have you. But that's a question that a lot of folks can't answer. So I began to tell them one day, I have my go-to apps. And normally on your go-to apps that you have, you usually keep those in the front, on the front of your home screen, so you can just click on it and it'll be readily available to you. So I had a few apps that I would go to, and I would just continue to click on those. And the ones that I don't use or didn't use, they would usually be in the background, or I would delete them because I had no use for them. So one day I deleted a few apps. I was sitting on my phone one day and I deleted a few apps, and I was like, oh, I don't need these, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete them. About a few hours later, I clicked on one of the apps that I would normally go to, and it didn't work anymore. And so, of course, I was puzzled. I was, kind of distraught and upset. I'm wondering why these apps wouldn't work anymore. So I said, finally, I gave in, and I went to the cell phone station there. I mean, it was Verizon at the time. I don't do any plugs for anybody. And so I went up to the counter and I said, hey, you know what? My apps are not working. They've been working all this time, and for some reason, my apps are not working anymore. And so the young lady took my phone and she started going through it, and she said, hey, did you delete these 3 or 4 apps? And I said, yeah, I deleted those. I don't use them, so I didn't need them anymore. I had them in the background. She said, well, do you know, because you deleted those apps, your other apps will not work? And I was like, wow, really? So after she, added those apps on, I started driving and I started thinking, I said, what if those apps were like people, where you would take your people that you would normally go to and you keep them in the front, you go to them, you always depend on them. But you have those people that are in the background that you kind of just throw behind, or, hide behind something, and you don't use them at all. I said, what if they were like people, and if you let those people go, or you just not use those folks, you will soon realize after you let those folks go that they were actually the driving force to helping your company run. So folks was looking at me like I had horns on my head. It was like, you know what, that's I didn't think about it like that. I said, you have to be very cognizant of who you have, even in the background, of folks that are driving this train and making this train go. And so that just gave them an outlook, and that gave me an outlook on, okay, so for those who work for me, or those who I am able to encounter or speak or give anybody any insight on using apps, whether you don't have a purpose for them at that particular moment, they serve a purpose in your organization. So I just got them to going and getting them to think of and putting more tools in their toolbox. So I had a few CEOs came up to me and say, you know what, I never really thought about it like that. And the way you mentioned it, I need to go back and start utilizing the folks that I don't necessarily use. I usually have them in the background because they're probably the train, they're probably the engine that keeps that train moving. But the people that I keep in the front, they're shining because of the folks in the back. So I just want to use that analogy. And one of the things that I always tell folks, in particular leaders, is your concern is not for those who checked out and left, but for those who checked out and stayed. Because you have folks in your organization that has completely checked out and they're still there. Those are your concern, because you want to see how the work is going to get done. What effort are they putting into it? And that's why diversity and inclusion is powerful, but not only diversity and inclusion, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, DIBS. Because if you have African Americans included, or you have Asian Americans included in your organization, yeah, that brings some inclusion. And that's diverse, and it may have some inclusion. They may be on this board, they may sit in this high office, but belonging, feeling that you belong to that organization, that's where you make your money, and that's where your revenue, that's where your organization continues to blossom, when you have diversity, inclusion, and belonging. That's all I have, Jenny. I just wanted to definitely share that, because I just want folks to know that you have to have that in order for you to prosper.
Well, Terry, you're exactly right. People need to feel like I was selected for this job, I've shown up, but how do I feel like I'm part of the unit, that my voice and my contribution is valued? And everybody looks at that. It's a major leadership principle. And there's so many companies that can have big impact in federal contracting when they do take a leadership role. And that's the other reason I wanted to have you on here. So Karen, I'd love to have you talk a little bit about this, because you've certainly been in this area for so long, and you're now working for Secretary of the Air Force, right? What are you seeing as actions people are taking, or what are you recommending? And tell a little bit also about your background, if you don't mind.
Perfect. So I'm guessing you can hear me. That's good news. So yeah, I am now working for the Secretary of Air Force. So last year, I actually made a huge pivot. It started a couple of years ago. I used to own a human relations, HRSS consulting group, and it was human relations strategies and solutions. And I've since sold that, and now working for the Secretary of Air Force, a 3-letter, so a couple notches down, but out of the NCR. And I honestly have just been super blessed to be in this space for so long, because here we are. It's really, talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. This is really nothing new. This is something that should have been a point of discussion many, many decades ago. We've come a long way, but we yet have so far to go. But I will say in the federal government space, because I know some folks are on as government contractors and always kind of like, well, who kind of sort of care? Tell me why it matters. And this is why it matters, because it is in the limelight. I mean, we just kind of keep coming back, but the federal government, I can tell you for the Air Force specifically, is taking a very close look at this, to the point that they have developed a task force. My prior boss, who was an SESer, is now actually heading up that office for the Air Force. And so they have a task force with, I wouldn't say 100 of people, but lots of people, probably about 40 to 50 people tasked throughout the Air Force and actually other agencies. And they're really looking at, okay, how they did some research last year, coincidentally, at the same time that we've been seeing a lot of the civil unrest and a lot of that in the media, particularly because it's been happening way longer than the George Floyd incident, right? So, but the Air Force has said, okay, let's create a task force, let's dig into, and then what are some of our action items? And that's where they are this year, is looking at, okay, what are we going to follow? What are we really going to do about it? And quite frankly, for my organization that I work for is under the Secretary of Air Force, is Concepts Development and Management. And so a lot of focus on artificial intelligence, machine learning, IT, lots of software engineers, that type of crowd, if you will. And so when you talk human relations and DEI, I think, quite frankly, and I'm saying this generically and kind of generally speaking, they're like, that's not really what we want to talk about. Ones and zeros are much more, appealing to them. And so we've really had to think about how can we have discussions around these topics, but it's not even just the discussions that is important. But also, what actions are we really going to take? And I will tell you, because CDM, Concepts Development and Management, the office that I work out of, we actually had a senior leader there go, in one of our open kind of forums said, I just got to ask the question, what makes this time any different than any others? And it gave great pause to some of our very senior, our director and our deputy director in particular, to kind of go like, whoa, I've been called on the carpet, kind of, but it's true. What makes this time any different? Because we've had these discussions before. I will say there was not necessarily a task force with agencies across the Air Force and even other DoD affiliated organizations that were actually part of this task force, that were, no kidding, developing the action items based out of the assessment, right? The both quantitative and qualitative data that they extracted over a study basically last year. It was conducted last year, concluded, and then the report came out late last year. And now they're taking the action, and it is slowing down. And so from the federal government perspective, they're getting, again, speaking from the Air Force side, they're getting serious about it. I mean, we're like, oh, crap, we don't even have a DEI office, which is kind of why I was brought in about a year ago. And I actually stood up the Office of Employee Experience, because you can imagine, as Terry has mentioned, everybody's different. And we even as leaders look at people differently and categorize them. And the bottom line is, how do we create a positive experience for everybody? And as Nick said, listen, we know there's a whole lot of middle-aged white guys in the federal government, right? And I can tell you, the agency that I work for, quite frankly, about 75% of the population is middle-aged white guys. And so how do we kind of start to change that, not just talk about it? The discussions are important, but what are the actions? What are, kind of show and improve? And we're not going to just talk the talk, we're actually going to walk the walk. And so the federal government really is, and I can tell you, my agency, I mean, honestly, it sounds kind of silly, but I'm super proud of them, because they're embracing it. And they're like, hey, what do we need to do, Karen? Well, we've stood up a council. We've started creating leadership opportunities for people of color to now step into and get, even if it's a temporary rotation assignment. We're reaching out to the historically Black colleges and universities. And quite frankly, we had a little pushback actually from our HR department, from our chief, because that's not how we do things. Well, we're doing it different now. And so we've really had to start to think about how can we, quite honestly, answer the mail to higher headquarters, but also because it's the right thing to do. So that's kind of the federal government side. For those that are contractors that might be listening in, I just stress that we know the government moves slow, but I will say again, at least from the Air Force, because that's where I'm going to be speaking from, because that's where I work. And that's my background actually as an Air Force veteran working in this space, is that they're actually starting to look at how can we, quite honestly, make contractors accountable for diversity and inclusion. We have, the saying for, companies definitely that 50 employees or more, we're equal employment opportunity, and we've got our plan and, all that kind of stuff. When you're bidding contracts, check the blocks. Yep, we're doing all that. Well, now they're looking at what does it really look like when we say we want diversity? Okay, different kinds of people. That could be a lot of things, not just the way we look. Inclusion, as Terry talked about, how do we include those? How do we include folks? How do we mentor them? How do we create leaders, turn our bench into those next, when we talk succession planning, turn them into our next set of leaders. And they might look a little different than what it looks like right now. And then you talk about belonging, and Terry couldn't have said it better. I mean, that's where the money is. I mean, that's where people go like, you know what? I love being a part of this organization because I feel like I am a piece of something bigger. It's not just about the mission set, but it's about, I feel like I'm a part of a family, that people care about me, they care about my growth, they care about my, professional development, and they want to see me succeed. And if somebody cares about me, no matter what my background experience or what I might look like, right, that I am a piece and I'm a part that is essential, no matter how different I might be, because we're looking even at neurodiversity and bringing in and really selecting folks that are neurodiverse, and so they might be a little different. And guess what? Difference is okay. How do we create that culture of inclusion and belonging? And so those are some of the things that I'm involved in right now with Secretary of Air Force with Concepts Development and Management. Loving it, as you could tell. It's an area of my passion. I'm just super excited that there are some government agencies out there that are really embracing this. They're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk. But that also means they're going to be looking at some of those contractors going like, if we can do it, then you could do it. And what are you doing about that? Because they want to make sure that their government contractors are also embracing and leveraging, quite frankly, diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
Well, I think what you're talking about is so important, about people kind of recognizing what is the problem and how do we address it. And so often the response is, well, we tried that. Well, okay, today's a different day. Let's try something else. Another thing would be to say, well, when you give more recognition to one group, then other people lose out. That's when we're playing a zero-sum game. And I think in some ways, as Americans, we're very much the rugged individualist. And we assume that if I win, you must lose. And what we're looking for now is a way for people to see that when we move forward, we can move forward together. And it's up to us to take some action so that it does that. So, I think back to, it really hasn't been that long since I was wanting to go to the Air Force Academy, but they weren't accepting women. And I applied under my initials, and I was okay until they said, show up with your jockstrap and gym shorts at Hurlburt Air Base. And I chickened out. And I would never have been a good fit for that. But I was on one of those things where it's not fair that my brothers have this opportunity to serve in a higher way, and it's not available to me. So it's what we're really looking for is, if we look at the foundation of our nation of being equality, independence, and freedom, how can I be free if someone else is not? And what we want to be doing is having more conversations. And if the conversations get uncomfortable, leave that conversation, go start a new one, because it really is a big ripple effect in all of this. And so I've got some people that I invited to be on this to ask if they could bring on some comments. And one of them is Michael Blankers, who I met on LinkedIn. And Michael has made several comments on here. As one is, we go even further within our workforce by reinforcing the statement saying we care. Michael, would you mind coming on camera and saying a little bit about that? There
Hey,
he
not
is.
at all, Jenny. Thank you for that introduction. So yeah, that was me right below Jenny there, Mike Money Blankers. Thanks for inviting me to the table. I see my man Terry laughing. Terry, real quick, Terry and I, we're old Navy buddies together. We were in the Navy, what's known as blue shirts, serving on board the Navy's finest cruise ship, the USS Blue Ridge, home ported over in Yokosuka, Japan. And we're both Chicago Bears fans, sporting our colors proudly. Looking forward to the draft on Friday. I love the segue from the Air Force, Jen. If I may share real quick, my nephew is a pretty accomplished high jumper, currently sitting at number 4 in the country down at the University of Miami. And when he was being recruited out of high school, one of the recruiting institutions, if you will, was the Air Force Academy. So me being the crusty old Navy chief, when he was excitedly telling me the news, "Hey, Uncle Mike, Air Force Academy's calling." I said, "Well, hey, Isaiah," I said, when they call you back, when those recruiters call you back, let them know that your uncle is a retired Navy chief, and he told you to aim higher." And so that's my little dig at all the Air Force folks out there. And hey, we love all our brothers and sisters, as we refer to each other in the uniform services. So keep it up. So that's my little joke, little funny haha. With regards to like I care, we care. Yeah, we being the VA is all about diversity, equality, and inclusion. Um, and it extends not just within, right? Not just within the workforce, but also to our, our external facing customers, which is our fellow veterans. And I think speaking and preaching to the choir here, based on my understanding of the summit. So um, I even kind of how Jen and I came together. I kind of am hard pressed, but I did kind of stand up amongst my circle of friends, what I like to refer to as a DEI coalition, kind of in response to the George Floyd incident in Minnesota. Terry, and myself in particular, kind of had an offline discussion, and what Terry did in his local community resonated with me, and I'll let him speak to that in a moment. And I think for this group here, and I'll just put that challenge out to anyone, anywhere, I think it's a grassroots effort. I think it starts locally and organically grows to a bigger level. And, that's pretty much what I have to say on the matter. I look forward to the opportunity to collaborate with anyone that would like to moving forward. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Michael, and I'll put everybody back in the middle in the gallery. So I feel like that what we're really trying to do is say, what do you and your community want to do, or what influence can you have among the group that you're talking to? And I'd like to come back to you, Nick Wakeman, based on what you're hearing. I think you made a really good point that business owners have more capability to make these decisions, but also nobody wants to be put on the spot and nobody likes to be pushed in a corner. But what other things are you seeing that you think might be effective?
Well, I want to respond quickly to what Michael just said about it having to be a grassroots effort. And I agree with that, but it also has to come from leadership as well, so that people feel they can, speak up and have that cover from the top. Because if you can't speak up and feel like you're in a safe place, I guess, to speak up, then you're not going to speak up and the problem's not going to get addressed. But getting more directly, I guess, to your question, some of the things that we've seen, as I was saying before, it sort of started slowly. I think as companies were trying to figure things out. Now we're seeing, we're a year or so out, we're seeing more concrete programs as far as training, more companies in the HR department reaching out to the historically Black colleges and universities. We're seeing those things. But I think it's still still working on how to have the conversation and when to have it, and making people that I think is the most critical thing right now, is that the ability to speak up. It's been interesting, and I don't want to get, political at all, but as far as like as a reporter covering this, trying to bring my mission as Washington Technology. Okay, we're a business publication, so in the early over the summer, we were writing a lot about companies standing up these programs and things like that, and then in the fall, the Trump administration put out that executive order to ban, the anti-bias and discrimination training at agencies and at contractors. So then it suddenly became in a way a more traditional business story, which was great because we could really kind of dig into it. So what's the impact going to be on contractors? Are we going to look at regulations? Are we going to looking at this? How does this ban affect? So it really opened up the avenue for even more conversations about it. And then, of course, with the election and the Biden administration coming in, they're reversing those things and they're going in the other direction. So it's the same kind of thing. It was interesting listening to Karen about, the Air Force. And one question I've been asking, and no one really knows yet, are we going to see what kind of contract requirements are we going to see that's going to foster more, diversity and inclusion? Are you going to, I've heard talk about them changing some of the small business programs and looking, instead of just saying it's 23% small business and then the breakdown is under that, trying to find a way to really, quantify, a diverse contracting workforce. Are they going to are they going to be asking for data from contractors, from the Booz Allens and the Accentures and those folks? And they're going to, so it's a very open question, but I mean, it's questions that we're asking, and I think we're going to see, because it will have, I completely agree that it's the right thing to do, but then there's also the business side of it as well. Like, well, okay, how much is this going to cost me? Or is this going to open up an opportunity for me to go in and do analysis or collect data or, support my customers as they push more into this. So, so we're kind of, balancing all that.
Well, I think that's very interesting about what could be done on the contracting rules side. And I feel like at least companies would probably in their management volume start addressing some of these things, just like they address that we're financially this, that we have this ethics program, and see, I feel like a lot of that, the responses to EEO were written many years ago, and it's now evolved so much that it's not what it was. And I want to say that I would hope that people would take a second look at that and say, what should we be inside our company? And how are we going to give an excuse that we can't find people that can fill these type of roles, especially leadership roles? Terry Spain, how about something to add from that? What are you seeing?
As soon as I take my phone off, off mute. I guess that was the number one phrase for 2020. You're on mute.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it was for virtual. But I do echo a lot of stuff that Nick said. It does have to start from the top. Oftentimes, everyone mimics what they see. And so if you see that your leadership is on board, and change, a lot of folks are not open to change, but the difference between I wouldn't say like a movement that we're doing now is sacrifice. That's the biggest thing. When you have a movement, you have to give up something, and not necessarily to the point where you're just giving up, everything within your organization. But this is America, and not only America, but companies are in organizations are in a unique time where they have an opportunity to make some changes, much needed changes. And oftentimes there is pushback, but when you see the end results as to what can happen when you have folks that are in your organization that has a voice, you start seeing your wealth. You start seeing, that's why a lot of folks change we hear the analogy ERG, Employment Readiness Group, but I've seen some companies that change to Business Readiness Group, because they said that if their If their organization is blossoming, like as far as diversity and inclusion, then their business will flourish. So they've some changed it from ERGs to BRGs. There's just this different way or analogy for them to I guess not be like like everyone else. But I think we're on the right track as it relates to giving other ethnicities, sorry, I couldn't say that word, an opportunity, because you'll see that everyone has an, how can I say it? I had an analogy that I wanted to use. When you get my age, Jenny, you kind of, it all is downhill from there. You kind of lose it. But when you see a unique opportunity to have other cultures put in different things, you'll start seeing business grow. You start seeing people grow. You start seeing people work together. In particular, like in the military, I use this analogy all the time. Boot camp. When you go to boot camp, everybody is stripped down to be the same person. There's no better person because you live in California or you're from Florida, you're from South Carolina. Everyone is on one playing field, and you all working together to achieve one common goal, and that's to graduate boot camp. And once you graduate boot camp, you're all the same. Everyone, no one's better than the other. And I think this is a good time for DOD. This is a good time for other private companies. This is a good time for America in general to get stripped down and everyone be as one, you know. And what's been happening with the outside tragedies that's been happening is opening up the eyes to not only one particular demographic that's been saying, see, I told you this is what's been happening. A lot of folks have seen it, and they have been a witness to that, and they place themselves in that particular person's shoes or their family's shoes and say, what if that happened to me? So I think now is a good time that we're getting a recharge in the United States. And like I said, there's going to be a lot of folks that don't want to get charged at all. They feel like, okay, this is how it is. And one of the most dangerous phrases that has been used in today's language is, it's always been done this way. And so when you hear that and you have folks like that are willing to just stay with that, that said, it's always been done this way, so let's just keep it going, that actually kind of stunts a lot of people's growth, in particular, a lot of companies' growth, a lot of people's growth. So I think we're on the right track with addressing issues, addressing people's unique opportunities to flourish in not only organizations, but just in the military or in the federal government.
Well, I think those are great points. So I'm going to call on Jeff Hoagland, and then I'm going to call on Karen to wrap up, and we can go until 1:55. So Jeff, thank you for popping on. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I just love to say I love this conversation because it doesn't happen very often, and it's true that the attitude reflects leadership. We need strong leadership in their position and in their authority to allow us to have the voice to speak confidently about protecting the vulnerable. And I would challenge any leadership that wants to think about what the cost is. Well, our greatest asset as a business owner is the human capital element, right? So when we invest in the human capital and the betterment of our employee workforce and the betterment of society, we're only helping our business grow. There's Raj Sisodia has written a bunch of books about conscientious capitalism, and it's all about the social responsibility. When businesses choose to accept that social responsibility, their businesses actually grow 1,000 times faster than those that are just worried about maximizing bottom line.
Well, and that's a great point. And Jeff has been helping people as a former EOD technician. He's been helping veterans deal with traumatic brain injury and has gone way, way off on making that happen. And that's an example of leadership. Karen, would you mind kind of wrapping up what your thoughts are for today?
So I just wanted to touch on two kind of final points to drive home, really the points that are already made. But one, I just wanted to say that if folks didn't know, the Air Force actually changed the government civilians performance element. So, their performance evaluations are done every year, and they added a diversity and inclusion element that they are now measured against. And in particular, supervisors are being held to that because, again, we're kind of talking about where does it start? Well, leadership. And that kind of gets to my second point. But before I say that, contractor requirements will come. Government is slow. It's just going to take time to figure that out, and how do they write that in and then hold them accountable for that, right? So I think that is coming. That's why I mentioned the Air Force and the government civilians specifically, because things are happening. You know, what's different this time? They're actually turning things around pretty quickly. But my other point is just the comment about leadership. And honestly, when I look at the federal government, again, I look across I've worked in this space for a very long time, and it has unfortunately not changed a whole lot. But, you know, Nick had mentioned, you know, MOGs, right? Middle-aged white guys. And honestly, if you look at our leaders, that is who sits in those leadership positions, because I would argue anybody could be a leader. But speaking to that, if you think about if I'm a white guy, and I'm not, I can't really speak, but I'm you know, they're going to speak more to their experiences, right? So what we're learning in our organization is that our senior leadership is mostly white guys. And so they're not comfortable having these conversations. I actually just had a senior leader on Friday say to me, you know, we got the verdict, and I thought something kind of nudged me to say I probably should address this, but I really just wasn't sure. And so I sent him a couple of articles on why it's so important. I don't care what you look like. And so Jenny, it kind of goes to your conversation, and I kind of wanted to approach this because, you know, people do steer away from these hot topics, because I'm like, oh, especially, you know, get into politics, just kind of, for me, I say just stay away from that. That's not your, unless it's your job. If it's not a job requirement, just don't go there, period. But talking about, you know, creating a positive employee experience. And that's always my, you know, you want a positive CX customer experience, then create the positive employee experience. And that was kind of alluded to. Well, how do you do that? It means you've got to be taking care of folks, which means you got to be having these conversations. And if you happen to be the person, a white guy or not, is not comfortable having these conversations, then find somebody who is, who could facilitate these discussions, because there's a lot of folks that are not performing at high levels because they are sidetracked, because they are very concerned about what is going on, not only from a national perspective, but within their communities. I just read an article, and it was on a little town in North Carolina, and they said, we never ever thought this would happen. We're just a little tiny town, and they're having to deal with some of the same issues that we see in these large cities. So it is everywhere. People, again, are sidetracked. They're not as focused. It's still conversations we used to say, if people are having, for example, marital problems, then let's talk, you know, let's get them some help. That's why EAPs exist. That's why we do have employee resource groups, to create groups of, you know, folks that have something in common to help carry some of this discussion and move these type of topics forward, so that it becomes more of the fabric of the organization, not just like, oh, we got to have that conversation. Oh, I'm really uncomfortable. And because I've never walked in those shoes, I don't really understand. Then find somebody who is okay with that. But the leadership's got to have, you know, create that kind of top down approach, but you also got to have that grassroots. I agree, it comes from both sides. But yeah, embrace those folks who are willing to have those conversations. And quite frankly, that's how I got brought in. I'm not afraid to have those conversations, those that know me. And I think it's important. That's where the growth and development happens. And that's where we provide the care and feeding for everybody in the organization, because there's going to be some that need it a little bit more, and that's not a bad thing. And then there's going to be those that are like, you know, whatever they're going to press, and it just is not going to impact them the same way. But we need to make sure that we are providing those opportunities, that our leaders are providing those opportunities to have discussions around the things that are going on. Because regardless if you think, oh, that doesn't happen here, that's what that little town in North Carolina thought as well. And we know different. So we've got to, that is the challenge, right? The topic of this was, you know, challenging you to speak up and lead. And that's what we need. We need people to be okay with it, or get somebody who is, tag team the effort, speak up and lead.
Well, thank you. That's a great place to stop, Karen, because it's all about learning how to take action, even though you're uncomfortable, and still give yourself some grace for, okay, some of this I'm not going to do very well. And when people give themselves a little bit of room to do that, they can have a big impact on the organization. So thank you, Nick Wakeman, for being here, Terry Spain, Karen Gregory, and being a part of this conversation today. I really appreciate it.